Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Art of Citizenry Podcast. I'm your host, Manpreet Kaur Kalra, and we are back. It's our first episode of 2026, and before we get into it, I want to acknowledge what many of us are feeling. This year has already started out incredibly loud, heavy, and disorienting. We stand in solidarity with communities across Minnesota and the country organizing for their immediate safety and for the safety of one another. I'm so incredibly grateful you're here with me. At Art of Citizenry, we're committed to doing what we can to keep the truth audible, to point listeners towards real resources, and to help each other endure and respond to the authoritarian threat shaping daily life right now. I'm coming back to this podcast after some life changes, and that has meant really thinking carefully about what it means to keep showing up responsibly and with the depth that these times require. If you have followed my work for some time, you know that I believe it is important to lift the veil and understand historical context when discussing issues regardless of how complex they appear on the surface. I have been thoughtful about maintaining that lens with this podcast, and as we enter this new season, my goal is to be even more intentional about making meaning of the moment we're in. And so for our first episode of 2026, we're taking the conversation to the epicenter of the siege, where immigration operations are unfolding, Minnesota, a place where ICE has made daily life unsafe and unpredictable, threatening people's basic autonomy and human rights through Operation Metro Surge, masked agents going door to door, idling near schools, racially profiling, and arbitrarily kidnapping children and adults. To better understand what it's like on the ground, I am joined by Minnesota State Senator Erin Maye Quade. We discuss the importance of documentation, constitutional observing, mutual aid, and what accountability might look like in the future. A quick note for all of you tuning in: this episode includes descriptions of state violence. Please take care while listening. So I'm Erin Maye Quade. I'm a Minnesota State Senator. I represent Senate District 56, which is Apple Valley, Rosemount, and a small portion of Eagan. So we are the burbs. We're the suburbs. Apple Valley has the beautiful designation of being like equidistant between Minneapolis and St. Paul, about 20, 30 minutes south. I was born and raised here, and I've lived here pretty much my whole life. I am married. I have a wife, and we have a daughter. She's 3. I'm in my first term in the Minnesota Senate, and have the distinct honor of being the first out lesbian in the Minnesota Senate, the first Black mom in the Minnesota Senate. There's 3 Black women in the Senate. We were all elected at the same time, so we are the first Black women elected to the Minnesota Senate. So, making a lot of history just by being who we are. So how have the various intersections of your identity shaped how you are approaching this critical moment in Minnesota?
It's interesting. I'm a suburban girl first and foremost and always. And I think that, under this federal invasion and occupation and really siege, because it's not just the armed paramilitary, but it's all of the withholding of funds and, Medicaid, is that right? And higher education. So this is just the armed version of something that was already in progress. But everybody is so organized hyper locally. I think that there was, 30,000 people that have taken constitutional observer trainings. And I think 1 in 4 Minnesotans participated or knew someone who participated in our economic strike. And so, I'm always one person. And I think that in this moment, we're all just bringing as much of our whole selves as we can. And it's mostly based on where we live right now. We are so distributed in organizing and decentralized, and it really is based on our immediate neighbors and our immediate communities. So I'm a South suburban girl, just trying to keep my neighbors safe.
You mentioned constitutional observing, and I think it's worth pausing there. For listeners who may not be familiar, what does it mean to serve as a constitutional observer in Minnesota, and why does it matter in moments like this?
Yeah. So in Minnesota, we've done a lot of trainings for constitutional observing. So I would recommend that people take a training before they go out and do it. But it is both a constitutionally protected right and a legal right for us to observe and record what armed agents of the state are doing. I have trouble calling ICE law enforcement because they're not. And they're certainly not enforcing any laws in Minnesota. They're just breaking them left and right, front, center, up and down. And so it is legal for us to do that. And so we are called constitutional observers because we are going to where ICE is, trying to kidnap people or where they're circling or whatever. And we are warning our neighbors. So we'll blow whistles and honk horns so people know to stay away, stay inside. It restricts their free movement, but it keeps them safe. And then recording what ICE does. So every time they have broken into a home, of which there have been many without a judicial warrant, the recordings are what gets those thrown out in court and the people released, right? When we see, violent tactics or we see children being taken, it is the constitutional observing and the recording and the documenting that is actually keeping track of our neighbors. And you have a lawless, masked, armed paramilitary running rampant through the streets, just kidnapping people. Constitutional observers are how we are keeping any sort of record of who they are taking and where did it happen and what happened. We are the cornerstone of preserving any sort of semblance of lawfulness in this state right now.
And I just want to provide a little bit of zoomed out context around that. So constitutional observers function similarly to legal observers who document what is happening in real time, creating records that can later be used in defense cases, public reporting, and litigation to hold law enforcement agencies accountable. Legal observing has its roots in the Black Power movement, beginning with the Black Panther Party's 1966 armed community patrols to monitor police conduct, an approach that later became known as Cop Watch. So coming back to what you were talking about, let's get to the question I think many are wondering. In your opinion, why is Minnesota being made an example for Operation Metro Surge?
Oh, I think there's many, many reasons for that. Republicans have long had this hatred for many of our leaders. Members of Congress, Ilhan Omar, our Attorney General Keith Ellison, obviously our Governor Tim Walz was the VP candidate on the ticket opposite Trump this past fall. And so I think that always kind of brings a spotlight. But there's the other parts too. Minnesota has been the antithesis of the Republican dream, right? We are a diverse, multicultural, very unified state. We have the highest voter turnout in the country, have the highest rates of volunteerism. We do have, I think it's more Fortune 500 company headquartered here per capita than any other state. We have more theater seats per capita than any other state, including New York. And so we just are a very rich, cultured state, and that culture includes cultures from our immigrant neighbors and from our indigenous First Nations neighbors, right? And so I think when Trump and white nationalists Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance and Republicans look at the state, they're oh, they just say that they care and love for one another. That's just a thing that they say. And I really think they thought they could come here and be haha, how easy to break the resolve of Minnesotans. And they're finding out the hard way that no, we mean what we say. We really do love and care for one another. We are strong because of our diversity. We are a generous state on purpose. We choose to be generous on purpose. We choose to have social services, and we choose to have nonprofits, and we choose to really invest in education and our natural resources and all of those things, right? That's just who Minnesota is. And so I think it makes Minnesota a perfect target for Trump and Republicans. And I also think who our immigrant neighbors are matters as well, right? We're a Midwestern state. We are majority white, but we have a high Somali population here. We have a high Hmong population here. And so I do think that also brought extra attention of look at those quote unquote others, right? And so, and the government has stated they want to remove 100 million people from this country. And there aren't 100 million immigrants in this country. And so they will have to go after, citizens. And we've seen in Minnesota that it's targeting Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous people.
Yeah, and as you noted, this inevitability becomes about who is marked as, quote, the other. In practice, that comes down to race and racism. So, what we are witnessing is racial profiling, plain and simple.
Yes. Yep.
And so, to that point, I'm curious. Many of us listening from outside Minnesota are only seeing fragments of ICE's operations and siege through headlines, social media feeds, etc. But you're on the ground representing communities living through this in real time. For listeners who don't live in Minnesota, what should they understand about the real human consequences behind those headlines?
So I think the first thing to know is that the media is under-reporting or under-describing, and not from a nefarious way, but in that there is so much going on that they have to find like a story or a set of stories to like describe a broad experience. And so, I would say the biggest thing folks should know outside of Minnesota is that we are under-describing how horrible it is because, one, it's almost impossible to describe it. And two, it almost sounds unbelievable when you actually describe the full scope. But so I'm in the suburbs. This started for us in early December. December 8th, I think, was the first day that we had folks going out and doing constitutional observing. And it's every day, all the time. It starts really early in the mornings, like 6 a.m. So what it's looked like over the course of 2 months has changed. But recently in my community, I represent the third largest school district in the state. We have ICE idling outside of bus stops on or near elementary, middle school, and high school grounds, taking parents out of drop-off or pickup lines, arresting daycare workers. They just, it's not arresting, it's kidnapping. They just kidnapped another daycare worker, I think yesterday. That would be the third one that I know of. There's 3,000 federal agents in Minnesota. That is more than the number of police officers from the 10 largest police departments combined in the state of Minnesota, right? So like if you think about how many people the 10 largest police departments are meant to, police, you get more than that. And then it's ostensibly here for a vanishingly small portion of our population. And so it is just overwhelming. They drive incredibly dangerously, and they're really just looking for what I call kidnappings of opportunity. Someone walking their kid to the bus stop, walking into work, going to get food. It's very much a detain Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous people first, sort out their status later. So it's not like regular policing where it's like, hey, we need to go pick up, John Smith works at this address. And so now they're going to find John Smith. We've got random dudes idling outside of bus stops, filming parents and kids. And when we think that we've got a person who is the wrong color, we're going to grab them. That is what's happening everywhere. Little 5-year-old Liam Conejo, which is, Spanish for bunny, which is why he was wearing his bunny hat. When he was taken, I think that image was very shocking for everyone to see. But that is like one of many, many, many children. There were 4 from that same school district before Liam, and there were 2 more this week that we know of, where the actual mom was detained at her immigration check-in at the courthouse, and the school district had to bring the children to the federal building, the first grader and the 5th grader. We don't know where the children are going. We don't know where they are. And that's one district, right? I could be driving my daughter to swim lessons, and all of a sudden, watch 2 cars zoom up, make a car crash on the side of the road. They rip that person out of the car and then drive off. Car's still on the side of the road. Keys are still in ignition. It's still running. That happens all the time. You just can't control where you will see this, where it will happen. It could happen to your next door neighbor. It could happen at your school. It is so overwhelming. It's just so overwhelming. And it's violent and dangerous and indiscriminate and all consuming.
It sounds like there aren't formal lists or clear criteria here. It's completely arbitrary. So, are there specific communities or neighborhoods where you're seeing heightened ICE activity, particularly as a result of the racism baked into how this siege is being carried out?
Yes. So apartment buildings with high populations of people of color, manufactured home parks, neighborhoods, schools that have a lot of kids of color that attend them. There's a basketball player. He's like the star basketball player at one of the western suburb high schools. ICE stakes out the basketball games because he's Somali, hoping to catch family members, friends, supporters from the community. There are ICE agents that have essentially like just sit in front of the houses of school board members who are married to people of color to like intimidate them, to stop them from speaking out against what's happening. It very much is like near places where people of color live or places they might go to. So like a lot of restaurants in my community, the Mexican restaurants, the Venezuelan restaurant, the Asian restaurants. It is not uncommon for ICE agents to go in and eat lunch and then come back later and abduct all the workers at closing. Or they'll just take a whole restaurant of people. So they target places where people of color go, live, work, or eat. Yeah.
Traditionally, we think of certain spaces as off limits: schools, hospitals, places of worship. These are places where, in theory, people should feel safe. But as you said, even schools no longer feel protected. So I want to ask plainly, are there any spaces left where someone in Minnesota can go and feel some sense of safety and protection?
No, they have abducted people near mosques. They've abducted daycare workers in front of babies at drop-off time. They are in hospitals and in hospital rooms. The city of Minneapolis, for example, the city of Burnsville, right next door to me, they have banned ICE from staging on city property, in city parks. They don't care. They'll just continue to violate the law, right? So no, I mean, inside their home, maybe, is where people have been sheltering in place. So nobody is leaving their home. Kids of color are not going to school. There are some districts where they're seeing 20, 30, 40% drops in attendance. People aren't going to their dialysis appointments, going grocery shopping, going to work. I mean, it is a crisis. And these are people who have lawful status or who are naturalized citizens, right? Like there are not that many undocumented Minnesotans in general. And there are far more lawful permanent residents, green card holders, naturalized citizens, asylum seekers, refugees, all of which are lawful status. But they have seen what has happened to people who look like them. And so they're rightfully terrified to leave their home.
I think this is an important moment to slow down. Given the fear and loss of safety so many people are experiencing, how has the community stepped in to respond?
So this is where the highly decentralized, highly localized organizing has become so beautiful and so needed and necessary. I think one thing to know is the media often refers to people who are constitutionally observing as like protesters. And I'm not saying that people don't protest. We protest here in Minnesota. We have a thriving culture of First Amendment demonstration, but we're not protesters. Like constitutionally observing, nobody in this country would have the story of little Liam or the St. Paul man who was a U.S. citizen that they dragged out of his house in his underwear. He's an elder. They wouldn't have the story. We wouldn't know what actually happened to Alex Preddy or to Renee Good if constitutional observers were not there. So it's not protesting. It's actually documenting what is happening. And then a lot of it is providing aftercare, because when they kidnap somebody, it's often the head of household. It's often the breadwinner, leaving tons of women with young children behind who don't have a job or no longer have childcare, because a lot of daycare centers are closing because too many workers have been abducted. And so figuring out how do we get them rent assistance, food, rides to and from, whatever. That has been a lot of what the community is doing. It's probably the most robust part of the network. So there's mutual aid donations. There's a huge, massive push right now because it's the 3rd of the month. Rent was due on the 1st. And so a lot of people aren't making rent. We're just rearranging our daily lives to try to serve our neighbors as best we can and get people connected to safe, trusted sources for help as best we can. And it is, again, all consuming, but we will do anything to keep our neighbors safe.
We've talked a lot about documentation, and I'm curious how that actually works in practice. Is there a centralized place where these interactions are being collected, or is it more decentralized, individuals holding on to their own records?
It's a good question. So the ACLU of Minnesota and the Attorney General of Minnesota have both launched forms for people to report, constitutional, civil, human rights violations of Minnesotans. And that includes like being able to upload any documentation, any information. So the Attorney General has that form and the ACLU has it. The ACLU is using it for lawsuits. Like they have a class action. The Attorney General is using it for future accountability. Then there's organizations like Gender Justice that I work for, full disclosure, as collecting evidence of gender-based violence committed by ICE and CBP, because that seems to be a through line that we're seeing. And then there's like local independent media that people trust to give certain videos to. So there's like ICE Out MN or Drop Site News, which I think was the first one that published the execution of Alex Preddy. And so, and Unicorn Riot. So there's like some really like local independent journalists too that people are sending things to. People sometimes send them to me or to a leader. I don't want to say a leader, like the person who was on directing the commuters at the time that the event happened. So sometimes the video makes it back that way. A lot of times people just post it on their social media and then they will send the link and people will share the link around. And so there's a lot of different ways that that's happening, but most of it, like the stuff that is on social media and the stuff that's getting to the news, like that's the videos where it's clear to understand what's happening. The stuff that people might be saying individually is like, I have this story and then I have these pictures that once you see the pictures, it will help you understand my story, but the pictures alone won't tell it to you. Yeah. Like I have a video of ICE back in December, like boxed me in and then like the Humvee was in front of me. And then he's like, if you don't move, I'll arrest you. And I'm like, yeah, but that guy behind me told me to and it occurs to me, there's nothing for me to do with that video, but it occurs to me all the time that like, it was worse than what happened with Renee Good. Like I was doing what I was told and I was directly in front of the Humvee as they were trying to drive towards me and they could have easily shot me. It was just really early in the operation.
This makes me think about the role of state governments alongside community-led organizing. In Washington state, for example, the state Senate just voted to ban law enforcement from covering their faces. Senate Bill 5855 would apply to local, state, and even federal law enforcement operating within the state of Washington. But to your point, laws are being treated as mere suggestions, broken left and right by ICE agents. As an elected official, what role do you believe state governments can actually play in moments like this? Is Minnesota thinking about similar state-level responses? And I guess the harder question underneath all of this is, does it even matter when so many laws are already being broken?
So, I mean, I think there's two parts of it. Does it matter? Yes, it does matter. Even though DHS continues to like violate law after law, court order after court order. One judge in Minnesota documented 96 instances where DHS has violated a court order and said, this is an undercount. This is just what I'm able to count personally. So they are violating law. It matters that we pass laws, right? We don't get ruled as a people. We consent to being governed. And laws are what we consent to how we are governed. And there are so many things that we didn't think we would have to say in law, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of democracy was just like, be fucking normal, right? Like that's just a lot of what this was premised on. Like we never thought we'd have to say like, no anonymous armed police force. Like no, that's something we didn't think we had to say, right?
Yeah. So we didn't assume that society would literally just fall into pieces the way it has.
And the don't tread on me people, like, hello, this is what you were waiting for. So the laws do matter. And it matters because we are fighting for a future where it's not where we go back to what we had, right? Because that also wasn't working for a lot of people. It's that we move forward into something better. But the foundation of that presumption is that we will return to a place where the federal government obeys the laws and actually like enforces the laws without fear or favor, which is not what we have, right? Where we won't have rampant corruption at the highest levels of our federal government. And so we can't just say like, oh, well, they won't follow those rules, so we won't like pass new laws. We have to say, look, we have found gaps in what our lack of laws allow for. And we want to return to a society of laws, of order, and consenting to being governed in a way. And that is what I think the state laws do. Also, there are things like states can pass a private right of action. So individuals can sue federal agents for violating constitutional rights. That is not something they can ignore. When you file a lawsuit, the lawsuit exists, right? And so they can't just say like, no, it doesn't. They'll say, yes, it does. So that matters. And I think that there's something important to knowing who is who. So like if we have a law in Minnesota that law enforcement cannot conceal their identity, right? Like in Apple Valley, right? Every police officer wears a police uniform with a clearly identified Apple Valley Police Department badge. They have a name tag. They have a badge. They have a badge number. So like I might not know who they are right away, but like if I needed something, I could call the Apple Valley Police Department and say like, Officer Tangerine, badge number 3456, and they could get me in touch with that person, or I could, sue him or whatever. That is the conduct, that is the standard in Minnesota. If we pass a law saying like that is the standard universally, then we know anyone who's not doing that is A, violating state law, but B, not a state police officer, not a state trooper, not a local law enforcement agent, not a member of the VCA. And so there is usefulness in actually setting that standard at our state. And people who violate that then are known to not be of our state.
As you're talking, it makes me think about something we're taught early on in law school, that the laws of a time are a reflection of community values, the norms and expectations of any given moment in history. And that's how the law itself evolves, because our understanding of governance and what is important is considered to evolve as well. But what we're witnessing right now is a blatant disregard of the law. So in a moment where the rule of law is being treated as essentially non-existent, what does accountability actually look like?
Accountability is like the palabra de año, the word of the year in Minnesota, because a lot of what we're doing is for that accountability when we have a government that will hold people accountable. And we know that that's not right now. It would be great because Congress does have oversight authority. They already have that. Like, we don't need to wait for anything more for Congress to exercise oversight over this. And to be fair, to be generous, I should say, most members of Congress don't live in Minnesota. They are not here. And so even though to me, like, the reaction feels very tepid, to be generous, it's to say, like, they're also getting this piecemeal. And there have been calls to, impeach Kristi Noem or, fire Stephen Miller. But, and so that is assuring. But the deep work into like actually uncover the true breadth of criminality of ICE and CBP in the state is going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a dedicated oversight committee, like a Truth and Reconciliation Council. The amount of trauma we've gotten through as a state is going to take, this is a multi-generational traumatic event for real. And so, Congress, yes, the state, we just had a Senate subcommittee of which I sit on last week that had Minnesotans, lawyers, immigrant organizations come and testify and put into the record things that are happening so that we have that at the state level. And it can be used in all manners of accountability and oversight in the future. It's hard to say like in the future, right? That is a hard thing to do. But it's important because we don't want people to think that this will continue on forever. It can't. And it can't continue on here, but it's not something we're trying to export to another state either. This has to end now.
What does the end look like? Do you see the end of ICE in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think one thing that's happened is that people took the leaving of Greg Bovino and possibly like all agents are going to wear body cameras now as some sort of like drawdown. Nothing has changed on the ground in Minnesota. In fact, it's escalating, right? They're into the arresting journalists and constitutional observers part, right? So nothing has changed on the ground. In fact, it was worse. Like after Tom Homan came to Minnesota, in my community, it was like terrible for starting that day and then every day till we get a little bit of a break on Monday, but today it's back again. So nothing has changed on the ground. What we are looking for is ICE out of Minnesota completely. Like this entire surge gone. Our Whipple building, like emptied, the federal building. It is a courthouse and like office building that has like some arrangements for holding people for like a few hours. It is holding hundreds of people in squalid conditions, no medical care, no beds, no water, no privacy. Like it's horrid. It's inhumane. So that Whipple building emptied. I want all our Minnesotans back. They are shipping them out of the state so fast, especially children, like within hours. And they're sending them to Louisiana, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. And then in Texas, they're getting released just like on the corner, being like, okay, you're good to go. And so then they're stuck in Texas. I want all of my Minnesotans. Yeah, I want all my Minnesotans back. And then, we have school to make up. We have small businesses to restand back up because holy moly, are they just, they are under siege because people aren't out shopping and eating. They've also lost their customer base or they've had their workers stolen. We are going to have to recover. So we have to recover that aspect of it. We're going to have to really we have shown that we can band together to overcome anything. And I think we will need to honor and recognize the tremendous amount of work and neighborliness that people showed in this time. Because if it just stops and we don't take a minute to like really sit with what happened and with each other and how we showed up, then I think that shows up in not good ways. We actually need to like mark it and honor it and grieve and mourn and do all of those things so we can like move on to that accountability and repair stage.
You touched on this a bit. People detained by ICE are routinely transferred to detention centers hundreds of miles away from their homes and families. Detention facilities in the South hold the largest capacity in ICE's system. The Star Tribune reported that in 2025, more than 2,700 immigrants passed through Minnesota detention facilities. They were transferred nearly 8,000 times, and detainee flights out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport have grown from approximately one flight a week last year to 3 per day this year. These transfers often happen with little warning, minimal explanation, and no opportunity for families or attorneys to intervene before a person is moved out of state.
Which is trafficking.
Yes, absolutely. Moving people around like inventory in a for-profit system. Detention from home isolates people from their families, cuts them off from community support, and makes it exponentially harder to secure legal representation. This geographic separation is not incidental. It's a feature of the system, effectively disappearing people. And this is why the location of detention centers matters so much. They're deliberately placed far from cities and communities to normalize isolation. And what you really brought home in this conversation is why community matters so deeply in the face of a system designed to sever it.
The day that they shot Renee Good, immediately after that, so it was in the morning, I believe, or the early afternoon. Immediately after that, they went to a high school in Minneapolis, just like a few blocks away, and then like tear gassed a bunch of kids and parents at dismissal time. And so for a while, it was that kind of stuff. And then like it shifted to door to door. We saw a lot more door to door. So knocking on people's doors, in apartment buildings, in, manufactured home communities, or in neighborhoods where a lot of people of color live, hoping somebody would open the door and they would just take them. Or offering people money to say, like, who are the Asian people that live in your neighborhood? Who are the Hispanic people that, yes. This is like, you can, for anyone who's listening to this and thinking that's crazy, Google it. It is like very reputable reporting. One observer who was violently detained, U.S. citizen, he was offered money to snitch on organizers of constitutional observing or for his neighbors like this. So that kind of stuff is like really insidious. We have more, they've changed their ruses in the last few weeks. Like they ask, there was a daycare worker. They went in and they're like, oh my gosh, somebody got in a car accident, like right in the parking lot. Can you come help? And then she came outside and then they kidnapped her. Or they like, or dress up as like, normies. And then they'll like walk up to the safety team around schools, because we have those now. There's safety teams around all the schools to make sure kids can get to and leave school safely. And they'll be like, hey, I'm Jack, I'm here with Indivisible. Like, what's up? What are we doing? And people are like, what are you doing? They're not very good at normal, but they are trying to like, get details from volunteers who are like just trying to keep kids safe. There was one in my community. This was on Friday. It was a Subaru, and it had like a little, like two hearts that were rainbow, like intertwined. So it was like a pride little decal. And then it had a baby on board thing. And then there was like little puppies, and it was just like a nice vehicle. Yeah. So yeah, the ruses are getting different.
I keep thinking about how these are the very tactics we study in textbooks as hallmarks of authoritarian regimes. We read about them in history and think, that could never happen here. We know better. And yet it is the same playbook unfolding right now in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think for a lot of this first year of the Trump presidency, it's been like whispers of, or like echoes of, and what I most succinctly could describe as happening in Minnesota is just straight up all the tactics out in the open all the time. Like whatever you imagine from like your history books that you heard about, that is happening on a regular basis here in Minnesota. It's not like a one-off or just like it happened once a few times or in a certain place. It's everywhere all the time. And that's why it feels so unbelievable to hear about, because you're like, my God, like they're going door to door looking for people to snitch on their Asian neighbors. Like, yes, they are.
Going back to something you mentioned earlier, it's clear that documentation is critical right now, not just to expose harm in the moment, but to allow for future accountability and reconciliation. And that brings me to a deeper irony we're seeing play out. The Republican Party has long framed itself as the party of states' rights. Yet what we're witnessing now is the erosion of state authority in favor of unchecked federal power. And part of why I raise this is because we've seen really troubling developments around arrests. There is a push to know your rights, which is incredibly important. But now there's this growing confusion and fear around our own rights. There have been reports of agents being told they no longer need a judicial warrant, that an administrative order is enough, and that force can be used if someone doesn't open their door. So how do you grapple with that on the ground? And how should people make sense of this moment when it feels like knowing your rights doesn't actually protect you anymore?
I mean, first I should say there was a judge who basically said in the last few days that an administrative warrant issued by the executive branch is like the fox guarding the hen house. They do need a judicial warrant to come into homes and make arrests, which is why I will just need to say this. Having members of Congress say like, one of our negotiation points is like ICE has to have judicial warrants. I'm like, that is already the law. Okay. I'm not negotiating. Like they've named 3 things that are already the law. And then one thing that was a best practice, which is body cams. And then one thing that was policy up until 6 months ago, which is like no going into sensitive spaces. So like not great negotiating, I'm just going to say. But what we're seeing people do is more clearly assert in real time their rights and state them for the record and record it. So like you will see people saying, I do not give you permission to enter my home. I do not give you permission to enter my home. You can put a signed judicial warrant under the door. You'll see and hear that a lot. Or, you know, I have so many videos of observers being just like their car windows being broken out and then being yanked out of the car. And the whole time they'll say, what are you arresting me for? Why am I being arrested? What am I being detained for? And so it just creates this factual record for each individual court case of like, this person did not give you consent to go into their home. This person asked you repeatedly to identify yourselves and say why they're being arrested. And the more that this Justice Department continues to like flout the law, violate the law, misinterpret, pervert the law. I mean, the judges in Minnesota are not happy. Let me just say that. And to, you know, piss off a judge, let alone a federal judge, let alone a Minnesota federal judge, takes a lot. And they're not happy. And so that's kind of how people are reacting to it. It's why the constitutional observing is so important. But also people are leaving their houses, right? People are fleeing to other locations. People have taken families in, they're in hiding. There's people I know in my community, like ICE just sits in the parking lot of their apartment building. And so they can't go home until 9, 10, 11. These are teachers that can't go home until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. So it is just all of this like safety planning and observing and notification and documentation there's this phrase, eyes on the street. I'm an elder millennial. I'm 39. So when we were growing up, like outside was a place that existed. Like if you said, where is Erin? My mom would say like outside playing, and like outside was the location, right? And the trust was that there were eyes on the street. There were many adults that had eyes on the kids in the neighborhood, wherever we might be. And if I needed help, I could knock on a door and someone would help me. And that's really gone away with technology. And what we're seeing in Minnesota is a resurgence to eyes on the street. We have eyes on our neighbors, on what's happening at the bus stop, what's happening down at the end of the road, what's happening at the gas station. And so that has been beautiful. Like we are now a community that has eyes on the street. And that means for our neighbors, we can protect one another. But I think about what beautiful things that might mean for our kids this spring, this summer, this fall, playing outside. If we might not see a return to more in-person community because of what we've been able to create beautifully out of this trauma.
What really struck me is how much of this work, asserting rights out loud, documenting, keeping eyes on the street, is all about rebuilding accountability from the ground up, a kind of collective protection. And I suppose on that thread of looking ahead, what do you imagine a return to any sense of normalcy actually looks like after this?
I mean, I think there are three forms of concurrent things that are happening. One is this like daily constitutional observing. It requires shifts. It requires people stationary and traveling. It's a lot of logistics. Ideally, that can go away, right? Or turn into something different. What would it look like if we took everyone who was trained to do it and was like, why don't you just be like on foot outside, walk in your neighborhood a few times a day, right? Like, what would it look like to just be outside more? The second is the like rides and kind of how can we continue to move people through our community that puts them at less risk? And hopefully that can go away completely, right? That people can have their autonomy back, right? They can drive their own car, they can drive in their neighborhood. And then the third is this mutual aid. It's the food, it's the rent, it's the clothing, it's all of those things, legal support. I'm hoping that that maintains, that we've actually built up enough connections to one another that even if a majority of people can go back to work and a financial crisis, I mean, it's going to take a lot of people time to build out of this financial crisis. But if they can or do, there will still be people who will need help. And they are going to be in our community instead of just an anonymous person like trying to get help from a nonprofit or a state agency. Like, what would it look like if our neighbors asked us for help and we were able to help our neighbors in real time? And so I hope that actually maintains and those relationships, those bonds are stronger, that we can help each other faster, quicker, and more neighborly, right?
What you're describing illustrates the importance of mutual aid efforts. And when I say mutual aid, I mean neighbors and community members stepping in to meet immediate needs, housing, food, childcare, transportation, outside of formal institutions, often because those systems have failed or caused immense harm. What are some examples of mutual aid and community-led responses that you have seen emerge?
So there's mutual aid locations in pretty much every community or a neighboring community, right? So it's a lot of churches because they're a really trusted place for people who are impacted to go to or to trust. Some of our food shelves and our food banks are also places. Schools now, like our elementary schools, so people will go and volunteer at the school, pack food or kid kits or whatever. And then the school, the teachers know who needs it. And they can organize trusted, community liaisons to go and deliver it. And so that is, something that looks like, but for a lot of us, it's like we bulk go to Costco and we just buy like bunch of bags of rice and beans. And then there's people who volunteer. And so they like separate it out and they know who has dietary needs and who doesn't. And then there's drivers who drive and deliver it. And so it is a robust mutual aid network and includes diapers and formula. There's a burgeoning breast milk donation mutual aid network. So women who are taken, there was a Burmese mom who was breastfeeding her 5-month-old who was taken away. And so we've had a community of women who are currently breastfeeding that will say like, you just tell me where there's a baby who needs breast milk, I will either deliver it or breastfeed that baby. So like there's prenatal care. A lot of people are missing prenatal care appointments. There's an organization of doulas and midwives who are helping people do more home births instead of going to hospitals. So, there's barbers that are coming to houses. You name it. Think of all the things you just need in daily life. And that's, they're organizing by profession or by community or by expertise and trying to do as much as we can for our neighbors while they shelter in place.
In the midst of so much trauma and harm, it can feel like hope is slipping away. But hearing these stories is a reminder that community isn't an abstract idea. It's people showing up for one another in the darkest of times, especially when institutions fail. That kind of care is what carries us through moments like this.
There's one more. There's because a lot of families that have been taken have pets, and so the pets are left behind. So there's a growing network of people who are temporarily fostering pets so that they have a safe place to go. And that's been a heartbreaking one. I'll just get a message and it'll be like, there's 2 puppies here at this house. They just took somebody and like, I don't know who they are, but like the puppies can't be here. Can we find a home for them temporarily? And so like that's another one that's come up.
I appreciate you sharing that. It's powerful to hear about neighbors watching out for one another, showing up, and intervening in real time. Amid fear and uncertainty, is there a story of community building that you reflect on from your district?
Something that's been happening is ICE will drive around neighborhoods that are being built, and they will look for roofers in particular who are on the roof, like building the house, and they will just sit and try to wait for the roofer to come down so they can detain them. Again, they don't know who this person is. Like they're just like, hey, Hispanic guy's on a roof. And the number of roofers that we have saved from being kidnapped has been immense because we have people who show up with blankets, because again, today is actually very nice and warm. It's like in the 20s here, but we've had sub-zero temperatures for a very long time in Minnesota. And we have people show up with hand warmers and blankets and hot coffee, and they'll stand there and they'll help the roofers like get whatever they need to stay up there and blow whistles and honk horns. And ICE will eventually leave. Like they either get cold or they're like, we can do other things because they have no idea who's up on the roof. They're not there to arrest a specific person. They were just looking for someone to kidnap. That was easy to kidnap. One of the hardest things is when you come across a kidnapping that it is just ending. That you happen to arrive at the gas station, at the intersection, past the neighborhood, and you see the end. That is heartbreaking. And so having moments where people were close enough to prevent it is pretty great.
As we come to a close, for listeners outside of Minnesota, what should communities be preparing for if operations like this become more common in other states? And what does meaningful support actually look like right now? How can folks show up in ways that don't create more noise, but instead amplify the voices of those on the ground?
So to prepare, I've been encouraging people you need to get to know your neighbors and you need to get into a signal thread together now. We started the signal thread for protection for my daughter's school in February of last year. It was so clear where this was going. And so finding those folks so that you have that resource, that group available when you need it. Buy your whistles now because they'll be hard to find, or find some other 3D printer that prints them because that's something that happens in Minnesota now. Get Know Your Rights cards, carry them with you in your car. Buy the battery charger. It gets cold where you are, right? Because it drains your battery really fast. So get the battery pack and the charger, keep it in your car. Always have a full tank of gas, right? Those are some of the, how can you prepare? Because if and when it happens in your state, it was quite fast. You'll all of a sudden there's just a tweet and then it's within days, this has just happened, right? And then find a constitutional observer training and, find your talent. If you have a small baby, maybe your talent is picking up a few extra boxes of diapers when you go buy them and maybe not driving your car near a violent operation of kidnapping. Assess your own risk. And then for how to support Minnesota, standwithminnesota.com. It is a place where you can donate and support rental assistance, food assistance, like any sort of mutual aid needs that people have. I cannot overstate how dire the need is, like how many people are not leaving their house, are not working, are not going to school. We ran out of food at our mutual aid donation site yesterday. And so it is so emergent right now. And if you want to like know more about what's happening in Minnesota, I really encourage people to follow like Minnesota local news sources. So our paper of record is the Star Tribune, or our NPR, Minnesota Public Radio, are just like two good places to start. There's also Ice Out MN on social media, Unicorn Riot, I mentioned earlier, Mercado News, Drop Site News. Like these are people who are, or Minnesota 5051 as well. They put out content regularly from like all over the state. And it kind of can give you a sense of like, oh, this really hasn't slowed down. This really hasn't stopped. It's not newsworthy anymore. It's just our lives now.
Absolutely. The normalization of this is so deeply unsettling. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Before I let you go, is there anything you want to leave listeners with?
If and when this comes to your state, like Minnesotans are here to help. We don't want every state to have to recreate the wheel. We can be helpful in being like, here are just some of the things that we wish we would have had at the very beginning, or things that we did have at the very beginning that were really helpful, or things that we had at the very beginning that weren't very helpful. It's going to be adaptable. Every state and culture is different and needs are different, but like Minnesotans are here to help, because what we've experienced, no one should experience, and they shouldn't have to experience it without help from people who've already been there.
I'm deeply grateful to Senator Erin Maye Quade for her time, her clarity, and the care she brought to this conversation. This episode is a reminder that community is not a concept, it's lived. It is the eyes on the street. It's neighbors caring for one another when institutions fail us. It's mutual aid, filling the gaps amidst state violence. If you're outside of Minnesota and want to support in a meaningful way, please visit standwithminnesota.com. You'll find additional resources and links in the episode notes. Please share this conversation. Help us shine light on the realities lost within the headlines. And if you're building community defense where you live, start now. Know your neighbors, build your networks, and get trained. This is Art of Citizenry. I'm Manpreet Kaur Kalra. Take care of one another. Join in solidarity. Band together. Ice out of Minnesota, and out of our communities. Art of Citizenry is entirely listener-supported. I truly hope you consider contributing to it by visiting artofcitizenry.com/support. Please remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and give it 5 stars. Thank you to our producer, Ali Ray, and editor, Stephen Blevins. Original theme music by Katrina Zemrak.